Don, we're back. It's been such a long time since we chatted. How you been?
Just great, Jeff. Life is good.
Well, is life good? I mean, this is the corona. Do you call it the coronavirus era or the COVID-19 era?
I mostly refer to it as the coronavirus. I think COVID-19 sounds too technical for me.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'm healthy. I'm well. I'm not bankrupt yet. You know,
Probably on the way to being bankrupt. Tell me, what is it like for you and lawyers in general now? I would think, well, you're a criminal defense attorney, and as you're touting here in the screen, you specialize in DUI cases. I imagine there's not much going on because people aren't driving at all very much, sober or drunk, nor are, I guess, there probably aren't many violent crimes except for maybe domestic violence because people just aren't coming into contact with people. Is my assumption correct?
sure. So, I mean, there are a couple of interesting things going on in that regard. I mean, my phone has basically stopped ringing. I've been doing a lot more expungements and record sealing type things lately. Those are the kinds of things that are getting the phone to ring. DUIs are certainly down right now. With bars and restaurants closed, people are not able to go out and drink and then drive home. Combine that with police officers being really hesitant to pull anybody over because they're afraid that they're going to contact people and get the virus. So that's all contributing to a drastic drop in DUI arrests. I was actually just looking at some statistics for LA County, and there have been very, very few DUI arrests over the last couple of weeks countywide.
What
Domestic
about
violence arrests,
violent crime? How's that?
sure. So domestic violence arrests are actually up because people are now stuck at home with people they thought they loved, and they're discovering that maybe they don't get along quite as well as they had hoped with their loved ones. So that is certainly one area where the police are responding, and they're continuing to make arrests, although they're kind of not really locking people up for very long because there are measures in place to try to keep the jails from having unnecessary people in them because jails are just crazy petri dishes for things like this to spread. So people are being kicked back out pretty quickly on those cases also. And then
Yeah, that makes it hard for the police to enforce laws, I imagine, because if people aren't obeying the stay-at-home orders, the choice is put them in jail where the virus will spread even more. Is that a possible defense if somebody gets arrested that you might deploy or employ, whatever the word is?
It's not really a defense, but on these kinds of low-level crimes, people mostly aren't going to be locked up for very long anyway. I mean, your average DUI, somebody stays in for 5 or 6 hours and then they're released. Domestic violence cases, sometimes they'll stay in, sometimes they'll post bail. Most of the time, even on a domestic violence case, somebody's going to be cited out and released after a couple of hours. What's happening now, though, is hearing dates. The LA court system is mostly closed. So hearing dates, even for an arraignment, are being kicked out till at least late June. Oftentimes we're into July right now. So it is an interesting environment for the police to have to work. People are being turned around and set free unless there's really a certain danger that they're going to turn around and go hurt somebody. They're being let go.
Right. So you were saying you have to be, I guess you were implying anyway, you have to be a little bit resourceful now and you're kind of shifting your emphasis to other types of cases. And that's understandable, but I was looking at the blog on your website, and I love you like a brother, Don, but I saw something that made me question your morality. I couldn't believe it. And you appeared to be serious, not tongue-in-cheek. You have a blog post that teaches people how to loot. Now I want to bring this up so people don't think that I'm kidding, and have a look at your website here.
Thank you for surprising me with this. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you put it on your website, you must want the public to see it, right? Now look at this. Here are a few tips on how you can carry out and get away with looting. And you have get a mask. Well, that's an obvious one. Be discreet, be in the company of other looters. So it's harder to pick out the one that actually did the dirty deed. Shop light. There's a nice tip. You caution people, even though it looks tempting, don't go for that 53-inch big screen because it'll be hard to carry away. Very thoughtful. It sounds like almost like you have a criminal mind there, Don. Take off the tags. That's a good one. If the cops find the stolen property, then it'll be harder to figure out where it came from. Very good. Have an escape plan. And then prepare for the worst. And then you have a link to go into it even deeper. This is unbelievable, Don. Now, come on. How can you justify this morally?
Well, if you look at the bottom of the page, it very much is, supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek thing. And it says, we don't advise people to break the law, and we don't advise people to go out looting.
That's so you don't lose your law license, right?
No, I mean, these kinds of things are meant to attract attention. So thank you for visiting my site and giving it the attention that it was intended to attract. And, people who are doing Google searches about looting and things like that, I want articles that are going to get their attention so that they will ultimately, if they are arrested for something like that, they want to find the right attorney, and that's me.
Well, I'll take your word for it that it's tongue in cheek, but if you read it, it actually is good advice, right? I mean, there's nothing in there that would be bad advice for the potential looter, right?
Well, I'm not going to advise people how to get arrested.
No, I guess not. Just how to loot and get away with it. Okay. That would be even more ridiculous to advise people how to get arrested. I agree.
Sure. I mean, well, and obviously, the buck stops here, but I do have a marketing team who handles those kinds of things. So I didn't personally write that article, but the buck stops here. I take responsibility for it. I did see it, and I certainly didn't tell them to take it down. So
see, this is an interesting behind-the-scenes peek at how lawyers operate. Now, how elaborate is this team? And what kind of stuff do they do for you?
Well, they manage my online presence and my marketing campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
I have, we do Google AdWords. We update the blog at least once a week with an article that I'm sure you see, often 2 or 3 times a week. We do custom images of various sorts. I don't even know what they're called. Amanda, who runs the team through her company, The Velours, she has a team of people who are web experts, and they take care of all that, and graphics experts and all that stuff. They designed my logo. I almost had to resort to them to ask them how to put it into a background like this, but I did figure out how to do that on my own.
But you better, they probably know marketing very well, but you better watch closely what they post, because you might lose your law license if they continue too much down this path. Maybe put in bold text the part that indicates it's tongue in cheek.
I'm not worried about my law license in that regard. I don't think the state bar minds that.
They don't? Okay. All right, so let's turn our attention to what's affecting the country. We have various governors, and as well as the president, declaring states of emergency. We have these stay-at-home orders. Some of these orders seem rather draconian. I've got a couple of news clips I'd like to show to get the ball rolling here. One is in Greenville, Mississippi. The mayor there ordered a ban on going to church, even if you sit in your car. They have these parking lot services going on. And they have restaurants in town where you could drive in. And then the governor of Michigan is another clip. She has some pretty wacky stay-at-home orders. She, for example, banned people from traveling from one of their homes to another if they happen to own 2 homes. And also another real doozy is certain areas of stores, even if the particular store is allowed to be open, she imposed a ban on going into sections that sell like gardening things and seeds and plants, even though growing food and so forth would seem to be the ideal solution, and people, as opposed to going to a grocery store. So let's just screen this 2 quick news clips, and then we'll come back and chat about it.
Lawyers from the Center for Religious Expression filed a lawsuit in federal court Friday on behalf of Temple Baptist Church and its pastor, Arthur Scott. The lawsuit seeks damages from the city of Greenville and Mayor Eric Simmons. Last Tuesday, Mayor Simmons issued an executive order banning drive-in church gatherings during the COVID-19 outbreak. The following night, Greenville police officers issued $500 tickets to worshipers parked at Temple Baptist Church for Wednesday services.
These incidents have been taken out of context. It is a misrepresentation of our officers. It is a misrepresentation of this council. It is a misrepresentation of this mayor.
The mayor now saying the tickets will be waived.
In an effort to move forward in a united front, the city will not require anyone to pay the fines issued on April 7th for the violations of the city council order.
Attorneys from the Center for Religious Expression say the mayor's executive order banning church services is unconstitutional and it violates the First and 14th Amendments. They say if you can get a hot dog at Sonic while parked at the restaurant, then you should be able to get the gospel from Pastor Scott while parked at the church.
Well, the overwhelming majority of governors in this country, as you know, have issued stay-at-home orders, but yours have been considered to be among the most stringent in this country. Folks who have vacation homes in Michigan, if they're residents, they're not being allowed to travel to those vacation homes. You're asking stores that sell things like, you know, paint and garden supplies, having those stores shut down, not considering them essential. What's the thinking behind your particular stay-at-home order?
Well, let me tell you this. Michigan has the third most COVID-19 cases in the nation right now, and we are not the third largest state in the nation. That tells you we've got a unique crisis on our hands and that it demands a unique solution. So we just had snow. I've got snow on the ground here in Michigan right now in Lansing. We're expecting, up to 30 inches in the Upper Peninsula. The fact that we're cracking down on people traveling between homes or planting or landscaping or golfing really for a couple more weeks isn't going to meaningfully impact people's ability to do it because the snow will do that in and of itself.
So is that the first time you've ever heard a constitutional argument like that, that it's all right to deprive somebody of the right to go to their home because the snow is likely to keep them off the road anyway? That's quite a novel argument, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't think that holds much weight as far as the Constitution goes. They wouldn't be able to go out anyway, so it's okay that we restrict them. Yeah, that's not going to fly or pass constitutional muster from any judge that I know, certainly.
Who's wackier, you think, the governor or the mayor, who sounds like a preacher, by the way, doesn't he? That mayor in Greenville?
Yeah, I think so.
We were misrepresented. I would like to hear his wacky logic on in what way he was misrepresented. He didn't explain.
Yeah, well, and I still haven't seen anybody actually share his order regarding the church services. He claims that the federal court misrepresented him, and it's overturning his order. But my understanding is that his order was, religious based. It wasn't a religiously neutral law, which is clearly going to be a problem under the First Amendment to say people can't go to church when, like the video pointed out, they can go get a hot dog from Sonic. If it's a similar drive-through type setup, there's no, basis for the government to distinguish between the two and to ban church when they're going to allow somebody to go through a food drive-through. It doesn't make sense. And when we have, under the First Amendment, our country has a very strong, history of recognizing religion to be an essential right. You're not going to be able to restrict religion specifically like that.
Right. But you could ban religious services if you're banning assemblies of people in general, right? And just include church services, correct?
Sure. As a facially neutral law, you're gonna have a better shot at getting that upheld. You still have issues with the freedom of assembly and things like that are constitutional issues, but then you have a better balancing test, at least, that you're not when you look at sort of a rational basis review, there has to be a reason that one thing would be banned when something else isn't. If you ban everything, then you're looking at more generally an assembly issue weighed against a public health crisis, and there you're going to get much more traction constitutionally.
Now, what about the governor's logic of you can't go to your second home? Is there, what do you make of that?
I think that's absolutely absurd. And the Supreme Court, going back to the civil rights era, has found that the right to travel is a fundamental right, especially across state lines. And who am I endangering would be the question, right? If I get into my car and drive 10 miles or 300 miles or whatever, and walk in the front door of another home that I own, who have I endangered? Not myself, not anybody else. I mean, maybe I stopped to get gas, but I mean, there's nothing there that I think would substantiate that level of intrusion on somebody's life.
Right.
And here locally, I haven't seen any restrictions that, you know, people are encouraged to stay in their homes. But I mean, there are a lot of people out driving around on the streets, including me, several times a week. And
you're not just saying that because the more people drive, the more potential there is to drive drunk and therefore increase your business. That's not.
No, not at all. I'm just saying there are a lot of people driving, and the cops aren't pulling over everybody who's out there driving.
Right.
So I don't see it as having really any teeth. I have seen stories of them, going out and harassing somebody who's surfing in Manhattan Beach out there all by himself in the water and writing a citation. And I think mostly they wrote a citation because the guy was being a jerk. If the guy said, "Oh, hey, yeah, okay, sorry," I think he wouldn't have gotten a citation, but he wanted to be a jerk and backtalk the cops. And that's never going to be a winning strategy out in the field.
Right.
Now, if he was a decent person to the cops and he gets the citation and then he hires somebody like me, maybe we have a good chance of beating it. Because, I don't think that there's really, a good reason for the government to say you can't be out by yourself in the ocean on a surfboard. Again, who's that hurting?
So when we were talking the other day, you brought up a 1905 Supreme Court decision, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, that you think is really the one that is probably going to be most relevant in general with regard to these emergency orders related to the pandemic. What's the basic reasoning behind that, and how might it apply to various situations?
Sure. So in Jacobson, the state of Massachusetts had passed a law saying that local public health directors can impose vaccinations for smallpox. So it's a similar situation where there's a public health emergency. It's more, the facts of the case are more limited to a vaccination context, which may be an issue going forward as governments may attempt to make people get a vaccination for the coronavirus. We're not there yet. But certainly, so the local municipality then passed a law. The public health director said, everybody's going to get vaccinated under penalty of a fine. The local preacher said, no, I'm not going to do that. They explained the law to him. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So he faced charges and a fine. He went to court, pled not guilty, made all kinds of arguments about why he shouldn't be held to answer for this crime. And ultimately, it went up to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court said, no, faced with a public health emergency, the government can do an awful lot of things. They have a very broad discretion to keep the population safe. And that would include mandating that people get vaccines. There was a narrow carve-out exception in the law that if there's some reason to show that it's medically going to be a problem, then you can be out.
Yeah, I saw, but only for children. I didn't quite get what that was about. They said if it's medically, if you can make an argument that it's medically unreasonable for children, you could get an exemption, but not for adults.
I think the carve out was broader than that. I'd have to look at the law again. I don't have that directly in front of me. But you have a better argument if you could show that there's a medical reason that you cannot get this vaccination.
Right.
I think
well, that's going to be a big issue, or at least potentially a big issue. There's a lot of strong feelings in this country about vaccinations, and they're working on what's the difference between a vaccine and a vaccination?
Well, a vaccination is the administration of the vaccine.
Oh, okay. So they're working on a vaccine for the coronavirus, and a lot of people are very leery about taking vaccines. Now, the court in that case said that they can't be too, any of these kind of requirements can't be too arbitrary or oppressive. But it seems like if the health officials say it's the right thing to do, you can't argue it, or do you think people could argue that they don't think it's healthy, even though the officials say it is?
Well, sure, there could certainly be arguments there, and people would have to bring in their expert witnesses, whatever doctors they can find who are willing to say that this is dangerous. I think that as a broad measure, it would probably be upheld, and then subject to individual exclusions based on their own health conditions or whatever. But I think the broader implications here are that the government can do a lot of things,
Yeah.
Not just about vaccines, but the government can issue orders that say, don't go to work, or, certainly the courts are closed and other things are closed right now. In California, in fact, it's Government Code Section 8665 that basically says that violating an order of a local health department is punishable as a misdemeanor. Fine of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in county jail. Which is pretty standard misdemeanor terms in California. So each state has their own sort of analog to that, and they can.
Yeah, well, of course, punishment and enforcement are two factors that mean a lot too. Whether something's actually enforceable and what is the potential punishment. I know in that Supreme Court case, the pastor who refused the vaccine was fined $5. And even in today's terms, $5 is only like $150 or something like that, right?
Yeah, $5 was a lot more money back in 1905 than it is now. But yeah, that's.
But not that much. It's like $150. So if you don't want to accept the vaccine, you pay $150. That the court ruled that they couldn't force the vaccine to be administered, but they could force the fine.
Sure. Well, that actually gets into more interesting areas that I'm very familiar with in my DUI practice. Government forced blood draws and things like that. I think it's very similar. If they were going to try to force you to, put a needle in your arm to get a vaccine, it's very similar to them putting a needle in your arm to draw blood. So there's some developed history there, and I think that that's right. The government probably would not physically force people to get a vaccine. The issue then becomes a matter of repeated arrests or repeated citations for the same thing. Right, I refuse.
Well, and also how many? It's also, I think, another big issue potentially is how does the population at large respond to this? Will they comply or not? If the population at large refuses to comply, that's going to be impossible to enforce everybody. What I see going on in Michigan now suggests to me that people are just fed up. They had this rather large demonstration at the Michigan Capitol yesterday. And that, I can't say for sure if that's a harbinger of what's to come, but I think it might be. You follow what I'm saying? That you can enforce things a lot more easily if most people are complying than you can if most people are not.
Absolutely. You're going to have a very difficult time giving 80% of the population a citation, or, pressing a misdemeanor criminal case against 80% of the population if that many people say, no, we're not going to comply. I think right now, we have these stay-at-home orders that, probably could be enforced much more broadly than they are, but the police aren't pulling everybody over and checking to make sure they're, somehow checking to make sure they're an essential worker or whatever to be out, or making sure they're actually going to the grocery store. I don't know how you would ever verify that, but.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking regarding that Michigan order about you can't go from one home to another. It seems to me like somebody could just say, well, I'm on my way to my home. How do you know I'm coming from my other home?
Sure. These things all assume that your citizen is going to be honest with the police and tell them what's actually happening.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
No, it isn't.
Look at where your car's registered and assume that that's your primary residence, and you say that you're going home 300 miles away. Well, okay, that's where I was living, when this happened. So.
Right. But certain things are enforceable, and I think you're right that this Supreme Court case is going to be applied, or at least potentially could be applied very broadly to a variety of situations. There was a case, I think, in Texas where they banned abortions because they banned essential services. So basically, they categorized abortion as a non-essential service, and a court upheld that ban.
Right, and I think they actually cited the Jacobson.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They're saying for public health purposes, people, they're canceling all kinds of medical procedures. it wasn't limited to abortion, which I think would be more of a hot button issue, but
Yeah.
abortions amongst, breast augmentations and, voluntary nose jobs and, whatever else people do for, elective surgery. I mean, it's tough to.
I mean, obviously abortion is a hot button issue, but even if you're pro-life, I think it's hard to argue that that's the equivalent of cosmetic surgery,
Yeah, I think that I was slipping down an odd path there.
Yeah.
But the government is going to be able to define, in essence, what is and is not an essential medical procedure.
Yeah.
And
Well, do you have any predictions on, what exactly are going to be the controversies in the coming months in this realm that we've been discussing?
Well, there are going to be a lot of controversies. I think that every order that's out there is going to be challenged to some degree. Somebody gets a ticket for being out of their house or, surfing in Manhattan Beach. I think that's ripe for a challenge to see if the government really does have that authority. And there's certainly.
And it could go beyond challenges too. I mean, in the sense that people may be filing lawsuits and winning money, right? I mean, it could be expensive.
Sure. I mean, people are going to be filing for, and I think they probably already are filing for injunctions against the government enforcing these orders that they're putting out. And that's certainly one way of going about it. That's exactly what happened in Louisville, right? The mayor put out this order. Somebody filed a case for an injunction, and the judge said, "No, you can't do that. Knock it off." So
Right.
These kinds of cases are going to be weaving through the courts, some faster than others, but on a wide variety of issues.
Well, like in a situation like that, though, I don't think there's potential for anybody to have a big payday. But if somebody was actually arrested or something like that, isn't that where the potential lies for governments to have to cough up some big bucks, perhaps?
Yeah, suing the government and getting money, you'd have to show that there's like a civil rights violation, or it's not as easy as some would like for it to be to sue the government or to sue an operator or government and actually get money out of them. There are broad immunities that apply to cases against the government, and there are rather onerous time deadlines and restrictions on how to go about doing that. So it's, sure, somebody will figure it out and get it done. I'm sure somebody will make a payday off of some lawsuit related to this.
Right.
If I had a crystal ball, I'd be the lawyer to jump on that, but I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a fan of spinning my wheels against government civil attorneys to try to get there. I'm happy to do what I can to defend my clients who are getting arrested or getting citations in these situations, and see if we can minimize the impact on them, or challenge the laws in such a way that make them inapplicable to the situation and keep people out of jail primarily, and also from having to pay fines or being on probation or something over conduct that didn't endanger anybody.
Right. Well, I think you're right that there's a lot of litigation ahead, and these are really weird times we're living in. That's about the only thing we can say for sure. It's a little difficult to say exactly when things will return to something resembling normalcy.
Sure. Well, one challenge right now is that the courts are mostly closed. The LA County court system is.
You can't put anybody on trial if the courts are closed, right?
Yeah, it's real tough to sue the mayor when there's no place to file your lawsuit. Last week, when I was on a web event with Judge Brazil, who is the supervising judge for LA County. He's the head judge for LA County, and he said at that time that they weren't even taking new electronic filings for anything.
Well, speaking of electronic, a lot of people have adapted to circumstances by using Zoom and other web platforms, and it's been getting the job done, so to speak, in a lot of ways. Have there been any trials yet by web camera, and is that something you think that's even doable?
There are people who believe it's doable. There are people in positions of authority in the court system who think it's doable. The court is implementing a lot more use of technology in terms of doing more video hearings. I haven't actually seen any video hearings happen in LA yet, but they're supposedly on the horizon. They'll be using
Have they happened anywhere in this country where actual trial took place by webcam?
Trial is a much different situation. I think that that's going to be very difficult. They're talking about it in the family law context. I've seen some things starting to move in that direction because those are all court trials.
Yeah.
I think doing a jury trial by video would be nearly impossible. And right now, LA County, and I don't think any county in California is actually bringing jurors into court right now. So there are no jury trials happening, and there's certainly not going to be a jury trial by video.
Right. But you're talking to clients by webcam, right?
I can talk to my clients by webcam, absolutely. I've done, which is completely unheard of in LA also, but I've actually done some telephone court appearances over the last couple of weeks, which historically has not been a thing in LA County for criminal. In civil cases, it's fairly common to do. They call it court call. But in criminal, it's just not a thing. So
I have a sinus infection right now, and I did a web conference thing with my doctor yesterday and got a prescription for antibiotics without even having to leave my house for the first time ever. So there are some positive aspects to this.
Yeah, that's great. We see a lot of things that are changing and that I think will maintain as some permanent, very positive changes for society.
My whole life up until this point, it was, oh, you have to come in, you have to come in. And it's like, well, do I really have to, or is this some sort of financial motivation, you know? But I think now insurance companies are paying for the teleconference appointments. So suddenly it's not really, quote unquote, necessary to come in.
Yeah, I think that it's a great positive change. I mean, a couple of people I know have shared that they've seen their psychiatrists via Zoom or telemed and gotten details on prescriptions and things, and I think it's great. In the court system, we're working toward that. I mean, boy, would my life be a lot easier if I didn't have to run around to 3 courthouses every morning. If I could sit at home and make a couple of calls.
Right.
But the issue is really, though, that most of the work happens inside conferences where I'm talking to the prosecutor off the record, and we might agree to something that we then present to the judge, or we might be able to simplify some of the issues before we go on the record. And I had a case last week where I called in the morning, and they told me that I could do this hearing by phone. And I said, well, gee, is there a way for me to talk to the prosecutor before we go on the record? And the clerk said, yeah, only if you come down here. I said, am I allowed to come down there? She said, yeah, come on down. So I got up, suited up, and went down to the airport courthouse and did what I needed to do, talked to the prosecutor off the record, and ended up getting a much better result than I would have doing the hearing by phone. So, there's a give and take. And, where it's important to my client's interests and where it's the right thing to do to get the best result is to go to court in person, then that's what I need to do. But there are an awful lot of times where it would be a lot easier to sit at home on the phone and get routine things done.
Right. Yeah. Most of us who are laymen think of just Perry Mason kind of aspects of the law in the courtroom, but the reality is there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. So you're saying most of that should be no problem at all doing a web conference, right?
Well, you would think so. What I'm actually saying is I think the opposite, that it's more of a problem if there's no mechanism for me to talk to the prosecutor off the record before we go live in front of the judge. Video conferencing or telephone hearings become a problem. I need some back channel way to talk to the prosecutor before we go on the record.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
That's the element that's missing. That's why I went to court, because I wanted to go talk to the prosecutor before we actually talked to the judge. And there was no mechanism in place for that. I think it's possible to create a mechanism for that. I think, if prosecutors would respond to my emails or return my phone calls more in between hearings, then that would, we could maybe sort some of those things out without having to be there. But they're overworked too. I mean, they have huge caseloads, and they don't have, they're lucky to get through what's on their plate that morning, not even looking ahead, 2 weeks at what's happening in my case 2 weeks later. They just don't have the time or the resources to do that.
Well, now that they've had a taste of it, the climate may be ripe to explore how to shift more in this direction. In any case, Don, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you, as always. And
Thank you.
and let's keep our eye on how things proceed here in this wacky era that's upon us, and you know, check back regularly and see what's going on in the world of law.
Sounds great, Jeff. I'm sure we'll talk next week.